take a moment to straighten your mats and cushions and then stand facing the altar for the chanting of the 3 refuges. So facing the altar, hands palm to palm, in a gesture we call hapchang of sincere heart. We will first take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in Sino-Korean, and then a second time in English. So even if you do not know the words of the chant, just throw your voice in with the sound. Now in English, I go for refuge to the Buddha.
I go for refuge to the Buddha.
and resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
And realize the great way.
And realize the great way.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
And resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
And resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
Please remain standing just for a moment. We have a special dedication that we read most Sundays. So after I read this dedication, we will make 3 bows to the center candle on our altar, which is our peace candle. Today, we acknowledge that this land where our temple buildings stand has been the home of Native peoples, the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe, the council of the 3 fire tribes, and also of Black Americans. We know that this neighborhood used to be a historically Black neighborhood during times of racial segregation and oppression. For our own awakening, and for the awakening of all life, may the benevolent energies of our meditation, chanting, and full presence here at this service this morning extend to all beings on this planet and throughout time and space. May there be deepening of our interbeing. May peace prevail and conflict cease. Making 3 bows. Please go ahead and sit back in your meditation places again for about 5 minutes or so. Please join me in some stretching to end our meditation period. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Jago.
My name is Jagwa Kelly Davenport. I'm one of the Dharma teachers here in Ann Arbor. It's wonderful to see you all this morning. You may have noticed that there's a few things missing in the room, including our enormous bell and many of our mats and cushions, and some of our members. And that's because they're all out camping this weekend and the following few days for our annual Peace Camp, which is our family Buddhist sleepaway camp. It's been going on for a few decades now, I think. I'm not
40.
sure. Is it this year?
years.
Is this year the 40th?
Yep.
Wow. 40 years. So yeah. So thank you for being here. And if you're going camping later, then thank you for going camping as well. I'm curious, how many folks were here last week when we introduced our new precept class? Okay, quite a few. Wonderful. Well, this week's topic is going to be kind of a continuation of that discussion of what role precepts play in our Buddhist practice. And as I was sitting here and thinking about what's the best avenue in, I was remembering an anecdote that I think is actually from a very famous self-help book that was published in the 1980s, but my teacher, Haji Sunam, has told this anecdote many times, and some of you might know it. And if you remember the author, then please let me know, because I have to look it up. It's the story about falling in a hole. Have you heard this one? Tong-san knows the one I'm talking about. So I think it goes something like this. I'm walking down the street and I fall in a hole. And I'm looking up going, how did I get here? Man, this world is really unfair. It's so dark in here. I can't see anything. Whew. This is the worst day of my life. The next day, somehow the person gets out of the hole, right? The next day, walking down the street, I fall in the hole. Why does this always happen to me? You know, what can I do about this? I feel so helpless. The next day, same thing happens. There's more stories about the hole. Who put it here? And are they out to get me? And, you know, that kind of thing. Although sometimes in Ann Arbor, I do have that thought. Where did all these potholes come from? One day, you know, a few days later, maybe you find yourself at the bottom of the hole again, and you think, okay, you know, maybe I can actually do something about this. I see, you know, I could climb out, you know. So they climb out. It happens again. That same hole. And then one day, the person walking down the street thinks, maybe I'm going to take a different street today. So that's the story. And when I'm thinking about precepts, because I want to talk a little bit about precepts as a kind of vow and the role that making vows has in a spiritual life, and particularly in our Buddhist tradition. I think about the many ways that the precepts kind of, to me, are present in that anecdote, because I think we all have our version of the hole that we're always falling into. And sometimes for me, when I'm in that hole, the precepts are the little light bulb. Oh, did you notice you're in the same hole again? Isn't that interesting? Sometimes it's the light, you know, just a little clarity in the delusion of my experience. Sometimes, if I'm lucky, maybe the precepts are, you don't have to go this way again. You could go a different route. Here is a model, you know. So while the precepts are not these kinds of commandments, if you were here a few weeks ago, you heard a talk by one of our residential teachers whose new Dharma name is Chichang, or Cliff. You might know him as Cliff. He just got his new name. He said the precepts are really just questions about how to live. You know, so we say, do not harm, but cherish all life. It doesn't really tell you how to do that. It doesn't tell you a list of do's and don'ts, you know. We love to get magazines with do's and don'ts, don't we? Just follow this list. I really liked that he said that. It's really about the questions. And I think it's really worth emphasizing too that this opportunity to work with these difficulties in our life and to have the recognition that there's another path is a privilege for us as human beings. And there's this lovely book that I just started reading in called Living by Vow. Very apt title for this topic. And so I wanted to share a little bit from that book because the author, Shohaku Okumura, who is a Japanese lineage teacher, I think he's based in Indiana right now, contemporary teacher, is quoting D.T. Suzuki, famous Japanese teacher of the last century, who you may know his name. And D.T. Suzuki apparently said, all living beings are living in Zen, but only human beings can live by Zen. So what did he mean by that? And Okumura explains, only human beings do this self-questioning. What is this thing all about, right? But that doesn't mean that we are superior to other beings. Because of our doubts and delusions, we cannot simply live in reality. We have to consciously return to reality and make an effort to live on that basis. So I think, as he's going to go on to say in the book, which I just started, that this living by Zen is akin to returning to that reality. And what does that reality really mean? It is the reality of no separate self, this deep interconnection of cause and effect in everything that happens in our lives and the way that we're connected to other beings. So today, the questions that I'd like to explore together, and then we're going to attempt kind of a reflective activity and see how it goes, is what are some of these vows that play this central role in our Buddhist practice and the development of our moral and ethical self? How do Buddhists relate to vows? What's sort of the role they play? And then the activity is going to be well, how do we do it? You know, we can read all the books that we want, but as one Buddhist teacher had said in a book that I read many years ago, you can read a lot of books about swimming, but you're not going to learn how to swim by reading the book. You have to get in the water, right? So that's the metaphor of our practice as well. So last week, if you were not present, we introduced this year's precept taking class. So once a year, we have this special practice period, usually around a dozen or half a dozen people participate and spend several months meeting and working together every other week, working on each of the 8 precepts that we practice in our particular tradition, and really trying to wrestle with and understand them in their own lives. How do I put this into practice in my life? And then our ritual is to have a special sort of graduation ceremony for them on the 4th of July, where they receive their Dharma name. So my Dharma name is Jatwa. And this year was the G family, which could be spelled either J-I or C-H-I because it's Korean. So it depends on the transliteration. So let me read to you, I need a copy of Moon Journey Through Clouds, the 8 precepts. I got to bring mine from home. And these are the precepts that they studied. And then I'm going to read you a couple of other versions so you can hear maybe just a little bit of different ways that people have adapted the language to try to relate to the intention. Okay, so these are the 8 precepts that our group would have studied. Number 1, I resolve to abstain from doing harm, but to cherish all life. 2, I resolve to abstain from taking what is not given, but to respect the things of others. 3, I resolve to abstain from engaging in sexual misconduct, but to practice purity of mind and self-restraint. 4, I resolve to abstain from lying, but to speak the truth. 5, I resolve to abstain from partaking in the production and trading of firearms and chemical poisons. 6, I resolve to abstain from wasting, but to conserve energy and natural resources. 7, I resolve to abstain from harboring enmity against the wrongs of others, but to promote peace and justice through nonviolent means. 8, I resolve to abstain from clinging to things that belong to me, but to practice generosity and the joy of sharing. So that's one version. I have quite a different version that I wanted to share with you. It's from this book that we actually use in our precept study group called Waking Up to What You Do, a Zen practice for meeting every situation with intelligence and compassion. I think I've probably shown you this book before. It was the first one I read about Zen practice. I bought it at a bookstore in Seattle, probably almost 20 years ago now. And Diane Eschen-Rossetto, who is the writer, has a really lovely, very contemporary, and you'll hear that the content is a little bit different. So our 8 precepts, the 5 core traditional precepts will be pretty similar across any Buddhist community, but there are occasionally additional ones, like our, what we call our 3 contemporary ones, the ones around natural resources, et cetera, that we've added over the years. So this is the version that she presents. You'll definitely hear some similarities. I take up the way of speaking truthfully. I take up the way of speaking of others with openness and possibility. I take up the way of meeting others on equal ground. I take up the way of cultivating a clear mind. I take up the way of taking only what is freely given and giving freely of all that I can. I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. I take up the way of letting go of anger. I take up the way of supporting life. One more version. These are a little bit different. So these are not precepts, although they are great vows. And so I wanted to share these because these are some of the vows that our teachers take. And I remember my teacher Haju saying at her ordination many years ago that when she first heard and read these vows, she thought, how impossible! You want me to do what? And when you hear them, maybe you'll have the same reaction. And I had heard this quote some years ago, and I think it was the teacher Dosho Court, who's an American Zen teacher, who's been at a few different centers around the States. He's a contemporary teacher as well. But I'm not sure if it was him, because I can't find the reference. But the sentiment, I think, is still accurate, and that is, if the vow were not impossible, we would not need the vow. Have you heard that before? So these are the impossible vows. These are known as the 10 great vows of Samantabhadra, who's the Bodhisattva of great compassion. 1, I will honor all Buddhas and never grow tired of it. 2, I will praise all Tathagatas and never grow tired of it. 3, I will make offerings to all Buddhas and never grow tired of it. 4, I will confess all my transgressions of the Dharma and never grow tired of it. 5, I will rejoice in the virtues and happiness of all beings and never grow tired of it. 6, I will request Buddhas to teach the Dharma and never grow tired of it. 7, I will request Buddhas to dwell in the world and never grow tired of it. 8, I will follow the Dharma and never grow tired of it. 9, I will always benefit all beings and never grow tired of it. 10, I will dedicate my own merits to the happiness and welfare of all beings and never grow tired of it. So I think you heard in those different versions of vows what maybe our writer Okamura meant by returning to reality. The reality that my actions have the ability to impact my own suffering, my own happiness, and also that of others. So I always appreciate when our Dharma teacher, Kusa, who lives in North Carolina, he always reminds us the precepts are about relationships. So we've got these big questions about how to do it, but ultimately the core is about how we relate to ourselves and to other people and other beings. And I think in some ways too, they're this kind of beacon of reminding us that when we fall into that hole, we have a little bit of a touchstone, right? We don't have to just rely on the way that we've always done things. We have this opportunity to act out of a different orientation, different orientation to the world, to ourselves, and to maybe even surprise ourselves in what our capabilities actually are. So I had mentioned at the beginning that these these precepts are not commandments, and Diane Eshin Rossetto kind of speaks a little bit about that. So I just wanted to read you a very brief section where she talks about what these vows, sort of what is the relationship to these vows. She's going to compare them to wedding vows, but maybe you can, in your mind, think of something similar if wedding vows does not resonate. It is useful to compare the precept vows to wedding vows. Whether in precepts practice or in marriage practice, vows are useful for articulating commitments. They act as reminders to return over and over to being awake and taking responsibility for our actions. Just as marriage vows don't guarantee that we won't say some ugly words, precept vows don't guarantee that we won't pocket the spare change from the store clerk's miscalculation. The precepts don't guarantee we won't harm ourselves or others. Rather, they express an aspiration and a commitment to do our best. Sometimes we express it reluctantly, sometimes painfully, but always with strong intention to see how we hurt others in our insistence that people and events go the way we want them. So in taking up the way of precepts, we look to them to help us in facing our blind spots. So let me tell you an example of that, especially the part about working with them in difficulty. So I took the precepts. I have to go and look in my my certificate, but I think it was about 8 years ago now, maybe. And I was part of the Ja family. So every year the name is the same prefix or suffix, usually prefix. So Ja means self. It's the Korean syllable. So Jagwa, or in Korean it would be pronounced more with the CH sound, Chagwa, could be translated as my fault, my misdeed, question mark, exclamation point. You probably didn't know that, did you? And I remember receiving that name because we're told in the ceremony, anyone could have any of the names. And so your job is to really discover beyond the superficial meaning of the name, how to understand it in your practice. But as soon as I got the name, I thought for sure it had been carefully selected for me. Because I really have struggled in my life with perfectionism. Always being concerned, what was my fault? And here I had this name that was like a koan. My fault, my misdeed, question mark, exclamation point. The punctuation was in the translation that was given to me, I should point out. And kind of just immediately hearing that, I had this insight that being concerned that everything was my fault is the same side of the coin of feeling concerned that nothing is my fault. It's this duality, right? So that was my first kind of thought that, oh, this is going to be very helpful for me, this name. And I think it's continued to be a koan in my life because the act of taking accountability for the harm that we cause does require us to sit with this really sometimes painful experience of being human and screwing up. You know, I hurt someone that I cared about. Was it my fault? This situation where I don't even think I was that involved, did I contribute to this dynamic? You know? So really it's given me, I think, a lot of courage just to ask those questions, especially in situations where it would be quite easy to just act out of habit. In the workplace, you see a couple of colleagues, they have some friction, and you think, not my problem. You know, they're adults, they're going to work it out. But if we take a larger view, sometimes there's more subtlety to it. How do I participate in this dynamic? Am I acting out of care for the harmony of this group? Or am I reinforcing this by occasionally making a comment like, yeah, you're right. You know, he never meets his deadlines. I totally understand why you're so upset. You know, how am I contributing to the dynamic? And that doesn't mean that my fault, my misdeed means that everything is literally my fault, because as we said, that's a lot of ego to think that I have that much control, right? But it is a really helpful teaching tool, at least for me. And I had an experience a couple of weeks ago where I had some really painful difficulty with some close family members. I was feeling really hurt and really rejected. And I had all the stories where I was at the bottom of the hole. They don't care about me. How could they do this? They can't see things from my point of view. It's always like that. You know, when we hear you always, you never in our storylines, that's a really good sign that we're not in connection with reality, because everybody is different every day, right? And that's, again, not to say people don't have patterns. Of course they do. So do we. But when we start going down that route, then it can be a mindfulness bell. So when this was going on, I was pretty mad about it. I was planning to write one of those roll up your sleeves emails where I was just going to tell them everything. And I was going on a long walk with my husband, and he was listening to this, and he said, do you think that Chichang Posal is our bodhisattva of great vow, by the way. Do you see he has this staff? And he uses the staff to go down to the gates of hell and rap on the door because he's going to go in and help everybody down there. That's why he carries that. So my husband, bless him, said, do you think Chichang Posao gets tired of going down to the gates of hell and rapping on the door and going in and helping everybody? And I said, I think he probably does sometimes. And that's where the kind of impossible vows come in, right? I will never grow tired of it. Maybe that's the aspiration on the absolute level, right? As a community too, I like to think about how do we embody that on the level of all of us as an organism, right? Of course, we're going to get physically tired. Of course, our feelings are going to be hurt. But reconnecting with that, and for me, humor helps. I really appreciated that he said that because I thought, he's like, didn't you take some vows? I so appreciated him saying that because in that moment, I felt such relief. I don't have to send that email. I don't have to fall in the same hole. Now, I wasn't sure what to do to address the situation, but I did know that at least because I had something to lean on, I didn't have to do it the same way as I might have always done it. And so that's another role that these vows can play, right? Negotiating the relative reality and the absolute reality can be really hard. I didn't want to be dealing with this situation. And it felt really intractable, and it still does, to be honest. But I knew that at the very least, I could not cause any more harm. And I could take care of myself a little bit and reflect. How could I maybe do something that would be skillful here? So that's just an example, maybe hopefully useful of the way this can show up in our lives when we are trying to practice with the material of our lives. And we have a few minutes left. I wanted to try, it's kind of an experiment because I know for myself that I really appreciate some type of guidance about how to actually work with these concepts, right? We hear them, maybe we relate to them, and then when we leave the room, what do we do next, right? So I've made a few notes here of things that I've learned in trying to work with these concepts and these moral guidelines, and then we're going to do a little bit of practice. So how do we do this living by vow? I think really having a mindfulness practice and a meditation practice is the foundation. And in particular, if we're finding ourselves revisiting the same hole a lot, falling in, having all these thoughts, not knowing how we got there, we need some stability so that we can kind of have a little bit more clarity on our experience. And meditation is one place where we can really learn to rely on our innate stability. The next one is developing what I like to call soft eyes. Got that from a detective show, by the way, but I really liked it. The detectives come into the crime scene and they say, you have to use soft eyes to see what happened. The compassionate watcher would be the equivalent in our practice. So essentially, when we think about softening our eyes, it's quite literal in a sense because we're broadening our perspective, we're broadening out our gaze. What do we notice that's a little bit differently? Can we notice different subtleties that we didn't notice when we were just seeing what was most familiar? So meditation practice, developing soft eyes as our compassionate watcher. The third one is, what if we stop doing the harmful thing? Just to see what would happen. You know, what if we ran up into those vows that we took when we were planning to write a really mean email and someone who loves us reminded us, you know, you don't have to do that. Maybe we can remind ourselves sometimes if we're lucky. You don't have to do that. And when we stay with the trouble that comes up when we stop doing the harmful thing, we have to love ourselves and the situation enough to really look and see what got me here. What's really going on with this? So staying with the trouble, meeting our habits of body and mind, and over time releasing what is unskillful. Okay, so we're just going to practice with one of those things for today, the soft eyes part. And again, this is an experiment, so we'll see how it goes. So go ahead and return to a little bit more of a formal meditation posture, composing your body and mind. And taking a few deep breaths, allow your eyes to close. Just checking in. Then I'd like to have you think of some kind of difficulty in a relationship that you have experienced any time in the past few days. Maybe you didn't even notice that there was some difficulty there until just now as you're reflecting, and you scan back through in your mind and you feel a little friction, a little energy around that interaction. It can be something as mundane as an offhanded comment that maybe you didn't feel that good about after you said it. Something bigger, maybe a disagreement or an argument with someone that you care about. Once you have that example in mind, take a few deep breaths, and in the spirit of that compassionate watcher, asking yourself, what was the energetic quality of my speech, mind, and body in that moment? Energetic quality is pointing at, what did it feel like in my mind and body? Sometimes we experience some heat, tightness, a feeling of wanting to discharge painful energy. Just silently in your own mind, naming those sensations. Then turning our compassionate watcher to reflect on what thoughts arose in that interaction, during or after. What stories or beliefs were present? In what ways did I react out of habit? And now, very mindfully, embodying that compassionate watcher to attend to breathing into anything that arose, just remembering this situation. Any tightness in your body right now. Gentleness and compassion, acknowledging anything that came up. And then just for a few breaths, placing your awareness in your heart, as if you are breathing in and out of your heart itself. You have an intention for how to meet this situation or others like it in the future. What word would you give that intention? Curious, did you notice anything? Yeah.
I had a good, when I was imagining like a situation where I was angry and then going through it at the end, it softened into like a more teary place. So finding like the sadness or the soft sadness underneath it, which is a good, it's like, okay. So that was a good change.
That's the staying with the trouble part, I think. Yeah.
I was thinking about a conflict, misunderstanding that keeps coming up at work between me and a coworker. And I really respect him like for a lot, but I think meditating on it just now, I realize it's her understanding of my situation doesn't have to be. They're separate, I tend to take it more, that's her experience, and my experience, my understanding is different. And that's when I'm able to see that, I'm able to soften my emotions around it,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When you asked us to put a word on that softer intention at the end, the one that came up for me was curiosity. Because I was thinking over a conflict that I've had with somebody that's kind of an old one. I consider this person a friend, but I also feel like we kind of been sorting out our past. And, she's hurt me in the past and things like that. Never been able to get on the same page. So I go to a point immediately where I want to kind of read or the riot act when we talk about this. You know, I want to point the finger. I want to judge. And it would be good if I could at least suspend that judgment long enough to make sure I can tell her story in a way that she would agree with. You know? And ask for, why do you feel this way? Yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you. I love curiosity. Then you don't know what the answer is going to be. It's more interesting. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think this is like a theme that's continued to come up for me. Relationships, like in my work, I work with people like in a therapy setting. So talking to people about relationships, like having my own like thoughts about how like mental health, like where it comes from, which I think a lot of it is relational. And it's like still coming to a point where like, I don't know, like, I don't know, you know, the right answer, you know, keep coming back to like this point where it's like, what is reality? Like, what is the truth of the situation? It's like, you know, even like with conflict between like me and another person, like I've been going through my own like deep conflict with this other person. And it's realizing that it's like, you know, coming to that same point where it's like, I want to be right. And it's like, it's coming from a sense of like wanting to be seen and heard and like this underlying like pain within the conflict of not having that. It's like, how can you not see it? You know, asking that question, but also realizing that like, they might be thinking the exact same thing. So it's like, we're both at this point where like, everybody's looking at each other crazy. Like, why aren't you seeing it? Why aren't you seeing it? So that's why I really connect with like this, I don't know, this thing today is like super weird how it like is hitting me and, you know, just thinking about it, just thinking about coming back to that mindful point and asking yourself like, what is the reality of the situation? Like I feel how I feel and, you know, why do I feel that way? It's like trying not to ruminate, but it is like having a sense of curiosity about yourself as well as like about that other person. Yeah, those are just kind of my thoughts.
Yeah. I definitely relate to the insight that there's some underlying pain. And then the practice is, how can I care for this pain? Is there anything that I can do for it? Thich Nhat Hanh, one of our wonderful Zen teachers, he uses the term accompany. How can I accompany it? We're not trying to change it, maybe, but maybe it needs a little bit of company. You know, so I don't know. We can keep going and see what happens. Yeah. I think I don't know if it was this book or something else, but I think they make the point of, even though our feelings feel so real, they're just information. And so, which is another way of saying we don't need to discount them. This is very important information. And we also don't need to be dragged around by them. And so I think this instruction of coming back to reality is recognizing when we're being dragged around. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I think when we were doing the meditation, I was noticing the discomfort, and I saw the situation where I wanted to fix the situation because I didn't want to sit with the discomfort, and that was my need of controlling my fear. So when I was observing with compassion, I chose to sit with the discomfort, even though I don't have an answer. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you. We call that in our Buddhist tradition the groundless place.
Yeah.
Did you feel it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can usually tell, oof, there's nothing down there.
Yeah.
But something that is always there, as long as we're alive, is our breath. So in our meditation practice, we can really develop the habit of coming back to our center through just breathing. So when we know that we're hitting the groundless place, we're clutching, we can hang out there a little bit more with practice. Yeah, breathing does help. Yeah. Okay, well, unless anyone else had a comment or question, maybe we'll, yeah.
I have a bit of a question. Actually, back
Yes.
to before we did the meditation,
Yes.
Qigong goes down to the gates of hell to
Yeah.
help people.
Yeah.
There's hell in Buddhism.
This
This is another bit of news to me. I've been here a year, and this is brand new to me.
Yes, in the Buddhist cosmology, there are what are called hell realms.
Are there heaven realms?
There is a place called Tusita Heaven, which is sort of the waiting room of Buddhists before they come back down to the human realm and become teachers. So yeah, there's a whole Buddhist cosmology, and depending on which particular country and which time period, it varies a little bit. But there are hell realms in the traditional cosmology of Buddhism. Yeah. Yeah, good question.
Still a lot of questions for just the answer.
Yeah, it's interesting because, our frame of reference in the West, if we were brought up in like a Christian tradition, we might have a very particular idea of what that means. But it's not the same thing. Yeah, if you're wondering. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I just want to say that's kind of interesting, because I know that in like other Buddhist traditions, it's like hell is more created, like self-created, which I have always found to be like very interesting, very connecting, considering like this discussion we just had, because it does feel self-created sometimes, even like unintentionally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, we'll hear a little bit more about this when we talk about Ulambana Day in a couple of weeks, because that's a special ritual that dates back to the time of the Buddha, actually. And it's a ritual of reconciliation and grieving over people that we either are estranged from or have lost because they have died. And one of the beings that lives in the hell realm is the hungry ghost. The hungry ghost has this huge distended stomach and a little bit of tiny neck, because they can't take in any nourishment, right? No matter what they do, they can't feed themselves. But we've all experienced what that feels like. So it is, again, the relative and the absolute are related. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's good enough for today. Thank you all so much for trying the experiment. And now maybe you have a little bit of a methodology to use in your own practice, and sometimes we have to get a little bit of distance from whatever it is that's happened. But when we're sitting on our mat and cushion, if we notice that there's a lot of churning coming up, before we go back to our concentration practice, we could spend a little time in that kind of reflection to just see clearly and release whatever it is that we're suffering with. Okay. So, shall we have some announcements?
Hi again, everyone. And also, I want to mention my name is Samoon.
Hi, someone.
Hey, Vince Marshall. And, so I'm going to just give you a few highlights of our schedule. We've got in September both yoga and meditation classes starting back up. Meditations on September 5th. Which is a Thursday, 6:30, and then yoga classes on September 10th, which are Tuesdays, 6:30. Yeah. We've got also a one-day retreat this month. It's next month, August 10th. It's a Friday, or no, it must be a Saturday, 9 to 5. And those are nice. Come here, you get a good meditation in. So we share a lunch, we do some work practice. And I guess that's about it. And as Chagwa mentioned, we have the Lambana Day service, and that's on August 18th. So, good to see you all.
So we'll end with the 4 great vows and then 3 vows in front of the altar. So please repeat after me. All beings, one body.
All beings, one body.
I vow to liberate.
I vow to liberate.
Blind passions, one root.
Blind passions, one root.
I vow to terminate.
I vow to terminate.
Dharma gates, one mind.
Dharma gates, one mind.
I vow to penetrate.
I vow to penetrate.
The great way of Buddha.
The great way of Buddha.
I vow to realize.
I vow to realize.
So then just taking a moment to care for your mats and cushions, let's stand and end with 3 formal vows.